Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We have a great session lined up for you today. Before we get started, there are just a few general housekeeping points to cover. First and foremost, please use the online question tool to post any questions that you have, and we will share them with our speakers. Second, if you experience any technical difficulties today, please use the same question tool and a member of our admin team will be on hand to support you. And finally, just to note, this session is being recorded and we'll be sharing a copy of the recording with you via email in the coming days. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to our speakers to get us started.
All right, let's go ahead and get rolling. Thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. We have a lot of information to share and cover from key trends to strategies and how to best implement software within your own organizations. Today's webinar is brought to you by Athenian, an entity management software used by many global private markets and real estate teams, along with West Group Properties, a Vancouver-based real estate company that specializes in the development of sustainable and mixed-use spaces. My name is Tina Grabisa, and I'll be your host today. I am a fund operations consultant here with Athenian, working with customers at various stages in the customer lifecycle to identify unique use cases, processes, and value realization. I also monitor various PE regulations, thanks to Lexology, and requirements with then aligning the platform with the evolving landscape. I'm also joined with David Grout, General Counsel at West Group Properties. David leads West Group's internal legal services department that provides legal advice to various teams while supporting them in commercial agreements, corporate structuring, governance, policies, and risk management. David is very committed to growing his legal team that's known to be very sharp and technically sound, but also very practical and commercially minded, which is really important in the real estate sector. I'm also joined with my counterpart, Rosie Lopez-Gross, a senior global operations consultant with a practical background as a foreign-trained lawyer. She brings over 10 years of experience in internal market expansion and global operations, effectively merging her global compliance knowledge with business strategy as well. In her role, Rosie closely monitors and analyzes key global regulatory changes and requirements, ensuring that Athenian's platform continually adapts to meet the evolving needs arising from global compliance shifts. So we have a full team here today with various different backgrounds, and we're very excited to get into the masterclass. So as mentioned earlier, we have a lot to get through today and lots of information to share. But to summarize, here's what you can expect from today's webinar. The first topic will cover optimizing entity management processes for risk mitigation. We'll then cover technology's role in streamlining entity management, as well as driving growth through strategic entity management. And lastly, we'll cover enhancing collaboration between legal and business teams. All right, so let's get ahead and get into this masterclass. But before we get into our discussion with our panelists, I'll turn it to you, the listeners on today's webinar, to share and drop some of the key factors that you've been seeing in the space that have been driving this technological disruption in your organizations and maybe even in your in-house counsel teams. So what kinds of things have you been seeing? What proactive steps are your firms taking to adopt technology recently? Feel free to share. So while you share those insights, I'd like to take a moment to emphasize the partnership we've cultivated with West Group Properties since 2022. Throughout the past 2 years, West Group has onboarded over 300 legal entities onto the Athenian platform, engaging over 20 active users across diverse business sectors, expanding from finance to acquisition teams, and even extending access to their external counsel. We're excited to have you on board, David, as we discuss some of the key topics in the legal space. So I'll give the floor to you to share some of your team's day-to-day responsibilities in terms of legal entity management and some of the quick wins that you've experienced and maybe some of the challenges your in-house team faces.
Sure. Thanks, Tina. And happy to be here today and appreciate the opportunity to chat and talk about West Group and what I do here and how we're slowly trying to move into the digital world. So So I started about 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago with West Group. As you said, we're a real estate development company. We're in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, and we are in called the Lower Mainland in Vancouver is where our businesses are. We've got a portfolio worth about $4 billion. So we've got a decent size as far as the real estate holdings go. About half of that are entities or properties that we own and manage as landlords, and generate income from, and then half of that is development. So we're constantly building in all different sectors in real estate. We build commercial buildings, we build industrial buildings, we build condominium towers, all of that. So lots going on. It's interesting for us is that it's you can kind of see the scale of the organization, because we've got about 300 employees that manage all of that that I just talked about, everything from acquisition to construction. We do our own in-house construction management, right through to customer care, interior design, everything. So like I say, we punch above our weight a bit, and are always being asked to do more with less, which is a pretty common theme. So and then with that, just generally in the real estate business, it's a risky business. We're in Canada, as well as many parts of the world, we're experiencing all kinds of challenges with high interest rates, high inflation, costs going up, all kinds of challenges here just to get projects built and completed, as well as dealing with our existing portfolio and our existing tenants. So lots of challenging times, lots of change seems to be the most constant thing. So we need to adapt quickly to changing markets and adapt quickly to changing regulations, which seem to be changing all the time. So I've got a few things on that for sure that Athenian has helped us out with.
Awesome. Thanks for the insight, David. With that, let's kick off with our first topic. Rosie and I have been keeping a pulse on the space, but more specifically in the real estate business landscape. Effective legal entity management poses a significant hurdle, as you mentioned, David, particularly in commercial real estate. So companies are lacking in dedicated in-house expertise. This is something that we've been seeing with some of our prospects, and this intricate process involves overseeing vital documentation, ensuring compliance with diverse regulations that are ever evolving, and really guaranteeing accurate entity structuring. Without the appropriate tools and systems, entity management can become very manual and consuming precious time and resources for very lean teams. So some things Rosie and I have been seeing is the need for a centralized system, automated processes for critical tasks such as organizational charts, tracking updates, establishing clear workflows, and maybe even outsourcing some of those non-core legal tasks. David, I'll turn it over to you again to maybe share some of the insights that you've seen in the space in terms of optimizing entity management for risk mitigation.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of my biggest tasks when I started was to do that. So when you look at the risks that we deal with, it's all across the portfolio. So and the entities we have, real estate, particularly in British Columbia, we've got some interesting tax laws that drive some structuring that we do. So every one of our entities pretty much has, every one of our properties, sorry, basically has 3 entities, 2 corporations and a limited partnership. That's why when you did the introduction, it's true. We've got over 300 entities that we manage. And there's reasons why we do that. Some are tax driven. Because in real estate is a highly leveraged industry, we use leverage and finance extensively throughout the portfolio. So in order to properly mitigate the risk of for financing and be able to obtain financing, we structure it so every one of our properties has its own little mini structure within it, and then that just grows exponentially as we have grown as an entity. It also impacts insurance. It impacts regulatory concerns as well. So everything gets touched with that, and it's changing, even though it's probably easy to think of real estate as you buy something and it stays there forever. Things are changing all the time. Like we have a constant loop, particularly in finance, because of the size of our portfolio. It's a constant churn of financing, which requires new security sometimes, new legal opinions. It's a fresh look every time. So in order to do that, we have to make sure that we've got proper entity management just to keep up with the financing churn. And then insurance is another big one. Obviously, as a construction manager, we've got about 1.5 million square feet of construction underway at any given time, all of which is covered by different insurance policies, which is a very high risk area. So that's another really critical way that we use our entities and our structuring and our entity management to really isolate risk throughout the construction portfolio. So again, for that, it's critical that we've got the right information, the right structures in place at the right time. And then I think the last thing that is maybe lost is that I experienced starting here is in continuity and succession planning. So when I started in 2021, I had a PDF of a list of our entities, sort of like a corporate summary sheet. It was about 300 pages long, and it was 4 years old. And that's what I had to work with as far as what our entity management was. So yeah, I'm general counsel, and it was during COVID, so I was working remotely, so I didn't have a chance to really sit down and dig in. So I was asked so many times, "Hey, who can sign for this entity or what entity?" I have no clue. And we were 100% dependent on external counsel. So that was a big impetus for me to bring that knowledge and data in-house, just because not having access to it, not having it at our fingertips and knowing what it is, I just thought it was too big of a risk to send out to external counsel on 100%.
Absolutely. And it expands beyond risk mitigation as well. It's kind of allowing an opportunity to work better cross-functionally with your finance and insurance teams and your deal teams. So we see that as a common use case when moving from PDFs and spreadsheets onto an actual centralized platform. I'm wondering, could you provide some examples of any common pitfalls in the real estate entity management process that really heighten this risk exposure, and maybe some strategies in addition to having an entity management system that could help avoid them?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the saying that we had when we started on looking for a different way to do our entity management, and it's translated into other areas too. I'll talk about. We talked about a single source of truth. That was our sort of North Star that we were looking for, because information is changing constantly, and it's needed by like you said, different areas. Like it's when we have, I talk about financing a lot because we're constantly doing different financing. We're developers, so we are constantly into a development cycle dealing with municipalities and different agencies. So making sure that we knew that we could rely on the information that we had was even more important. It's sort of 1A, 1B to actually having access to the information, because if you don't have access to the right information, that's a problem. But if you have access to the wrong information, that's even a bigger problem. So that, like I said, we had the single source of truth as our guiding light. And then once we were able to achieve that and create a single source of truth and be able to scale that with deciding what information we put in, we're able to share that with different people in our organization. And that's and I'll take tax as a great example. We've had a VP of tax here for 30 years, and he's always done things one way, which was he needed something, he sent an email or pick up the phone to our external counsel. And then it would, there's always a bit of a delay. It would come back, and there's always a bill that's attached to it. And now he's got that information at his fingertips, and it's, when you, on a one-off basis, it doesn't seem like much, but you can imagine when you've got, a small group of people that have to respond to 300 different entities, it adds up over time. So those half a day or a day of not having to wait for answers makes a pretty big difference. And on the risk side, it's having the confidence in knowing that the information is correct. That's a huge factor for us.
Yeah, for sure. And it's creating that relationship with your VP to kind of self-service from a platform and really reduce those costs with external counsel. That's really the entry level of how to bring an entity management system within an organization that has historically been on PDF spreadsheets and really relying heavily on outside counsel. But with your experience maybe in the past and now with West Group, just from a future approach, is it better fully in-house, fully outsourced, or hybrid from an entity management perspective? What best supports the compliance and risk mitigation, especially in the real estate sector? And maybe share why as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of I've obviously been very happy with bringing things in-house. That's part of it's a bit of our culture here at West Group too. Like we're very vertically integrated throughout the entire process. So we are always looking for opportunities to insource tasks and functions where it makes sense. And that's something that's consistent throughout the organization. So this, bringing that, in my world, with just our corporate work and our entity management work, it made a lot of sense to say, this is something that we should have in-house. We can bring it in-house. And so I fully embraced that mindset, as did everybody here, and I got 100% support for it. And it's been great. So I'm a big fan of bringing the information in-house, because I think it's important to have. Like that was the cost benefit was great. That helps build a good business case, especially as an internal legal department where we're a cost center, right? And we can be outsourced at any time. So it's always good to find opportunities as an in-house service provider. Or I call it addition by subtraction, where I can show a real strong business case, which has real dollars attached to it. So that makes it a pretty easy sell. So for my experience, that's been great. And what I've really liked is seeing how it's been really picked up by people within the organization. Right from, we started off small with our legal group, just to make sure that we understood it and we got it right, and knew how to work everything and work the Athenian system and validate it. We spent a lot of time validating data. Like I got 300 paper minute books binders sent to me, so I spent a lot of time on the scanner, putting that through. And part of that was my sort of longhand way to learn the portfolio, but it also really was validating, because I looked through and what I was finding is that, what had happened over the course of years was information was just being added to, but it was never really vetted for what was not relevant anymore. So there was a whole mess of information that were in those minute books that just weren't relevant. So it made it really, really confusing. So we were able to really drill that down, and get to, again, I come back to that single source of truth, where we could have one property that has 7 different historical agreements to it, but only one really matters. So that's the one that I want to have at people's fingertips. The other ones go in archives. So those are things that have been really, really beneficial to our process here.
For sure. And it seems that West Group is very receptive to change and change management. And I know sometimes there is a resistance to change, even if there is a good business case that's put forward. So in terms of rolling out Athenian within your own team and then other teams within the organization, what did that process look like at first? People were used to using paper copies, paper minute books, and just not having a tool to reference. What did that rollout look like? Was there any challenges at the start? Was it easy to start learning to use the platform?
Yeah, I mean, on your comments about change, I mean, it's funny, we talk a lot about, EQ gets brought up a lot in organizations, and emotional intelligence, which is important, but we're really, along with that, we're migrating and really changing our mindset to AQ, and adaptability quotient, because, as we've seen in the last, just looking at the last 4 years, the pace of change is just growing exponentially. So we have to embrace change, or else we'll get left in the dust. So that's a great way to, for me, it's very refreshing to have that mindset here. So when I start to suggest, again, as a cost center, when I start to suggest, hey, this is something we can do, I get a lot of buy-in with that, which is good. For us, it was the hardest part about the process was just literally converting. There's so much paper that had to be scanned and validated and inputted and vetted. That was the biggest challenge. Again, it's because we have such a small team. It was really me and one other here that did all of it, for like 300 entities, and we have entities that have been around for 30 years. So there's a lot of very flimsy carbon paper that it was tucked away in these minute books. So that was the hardest part, but that was also the most important part too. Like that was, and we spent a lot of time. I know that your team was extremely patient with us, because we took our time to go through that, but we had to, because we needed to make sure that we got it right. And for us, we were all relatively new. So again, part of that transition for us was making sure that we did a deep dive into the entities. So that was really the hardest part, was just going through the old information, vetting it, the actual transition. Our external counsel using ALF, so there was some good digital transition that happened there. So that wasn't terribly difficult, but again, that's the validation part that really took the longest time. But once we've done that, we've been off to the races. It's been great to do that. And then as far as rolling it out, it's actually great, because as we started small with our legal team, really to make sure that we understood the platform, because I figured we needed to be masters of it first before we could confidently kind of roll it out. And then it was a little bit at a time. Like there's a few people that, like our VP tax, for example, he needed a lot of information a lot quickly. So started off with him, and so he's got up and running. And then we've gone to other areas of the organization and finance. Again, it's really because it was a black box before, right? Like people would ask the question, hey, what entity is this? What do we use for here? Can I get an org chart for this particular entity? And my group didn't necessarily have the information, so that was always going to external, but we kept getting the questions. So then that's why we realized, okay, you know what, we'll start bringing people in, and it's great. And it's part of what we're trying to do with that is give people more tools to work with and make their life easier. So now that they've been able to do that, it's been great. They're very happy with it, and it's super easy for everybody to learn. Like it's very intuitive. And so there's been no problems at all. We still, as far as our legal group, we still control like creating entities. And if we're doing, like the legal, like the actual entity, like we're doing amalgamations or entity creation or what have you, we'll still do that, just because we're the experts and make sure that we do that right. But we can now all do that in-house too. Like that's the other thing. Like we don't have, I wouldn't say we're not constantly changing, but there's enough change that we're doing, whether it's creating new entities or amalgamations or what have you. There's enough that there's a real benefit to be able to just handle that all in-house, and get it done.
Makes sense. And that's what we're hearing in the real estate sector, especially, and within fund ops. The core of the business is the entity creation process. And if it can be expedited, it gives a lot more valuable time back to your team. Yeah. All right. Moving on to the second topic.
Yes, what I wanted to add is that this is a great segue to our second topic. David, all you've shared about embracing change, having change management processes in place for the team to understand how adopting technology for entity management, for example, will in the long run make their lives easier. And there was another thing that you mentioned, and is how you focus on bringing things in-house, but we know that bringing things in-house also comes with other challenges. So again, one of the things that you mentioned that I want to recap is how Athenian is helping your team create entities, have a single source of truth for corporate records, etc. But now I want to learn more about what are the other technologies that your team uses on a day-to-day basis. And as Tina said at the beginning of the call, my background is from the global operations world, and I'm all about finding cross-industry knowledge sharing, not only to find commonalities, but also new ways of doing things, or just to validate that what other legal teams are using or doing works. But what are those key technologies that your team uses apart from Athenian to help them make their jobs easier, to become more efficient on their day-to-day?
Sure, Rosie. Yeah, it's so for us, we're catching up, I would say, we as far as adopting technology. And there's been, again, in the last, just the time that I've been here, we've gone from basically running everything off of Excel spreadsheets. We didn't track, we just started tracking, for example, legal spend across the company, but it was very dispersed, right? So it's, that was something that I came in, and people would ask me, how much do we spend a year in external legal? I don't know. I didn't have the data. Part of that was because we had concentrated everything with one firm, and we needed to diversify. But part of it was, we're a private company, a family-owned company. We've been around for a little over 50 years. And though there's been relationships for like 40 years, which are great and served the company really well for a long time. But the challenge, I think, is in the last 5 to 7 years, our growth has gone up immensely, and it's going to keep going. Like, we'll be tripling our construction output in like 2 years. So we're in we're in a situation corporately for like the first 45 years of existence was pretty stable. It was, we own a bunch of properties, and we build on some and we don't build on others. But then it's just turning in this massive growth stage. So as an organization, we looked at all the technology that we're using, because we had all kinds of patchwork technology everywhere. Some things were redundant, some things just weren't working. Other things hadn't worked for years, but nobody figured out and tried to get rid of it. So we undertook corporately, and still are doing a massive project just to see what technology we're using, what we need, what we don't need, what we should use, and what we shouldn't use. So that's been a really good backdrop for me to really dig into what technology we can use in our legal team, because when I got here, we didn't use any beyond like Outlook and Excel, and that's about it. So Athenian was the first step to do that. We've just now finally implemented an e-billing software. Again, we're catching up. We don't have a massive legal spend. Like, we're probably 2 million a year in legal spend. So we don't have a massive legal spend, but that's going to go up. But we also never tracked it. So that was something that, for me, it's taken this long to get to the point where, I can actually start putting some KPIs against legal spend, but I need the data in order to make it worthwhile. So again, Athenian was the first step. Then we moved into an e-billing. And with that is also a matter management, which is also something we didn't have before. So now we're starting to actually track how much work we do, because it's another question you get asked. It is an internal legal, we're kind of always faced with this justify your existence question. So now we're starting to be able to get to the point where we can, now I can get better data to see what our expenses are, what our costs are. And it's always a challenge for in-house legal to figure out what a good metric is. There's lots of different ways you can do it. So I'm working on that, figure out what's the right metric to use. And then on spend, and then it's just getting a sense of what do we do? You know, we get that question a lot from people. So what do you do as a legal group? Well, the answer is all kinds of stuff, but we actually put some data behind it now, which is really, really good. So those are two things that I'm implementing here. Concurrent with that, the other thing what we don't have is a contract management system. We don't have a document management system. It's document control and version control. Sometimes I got spoiled being in private practice for 15 years, where it's all about document management and very tight, and then come in here and everybody wants to collaborate and everybody, chimes in on a document, and I'm like, this thing looks horrible. It's like I don't understand anything. So trying to wrestle some document management on that. That's a really, really big project that I don't think we'll do, but we are starting it. One of the benefits of us having a bunch of different divisions is we have a large construction division. So they're actually implementing some document and contract management on their side. It's probably the biggest risk area we have in our company. So I'm able to work with them with the platform that they're using, which is very specific to construction and deals with everything from initial contracting to change orders to invoicing. Construction is very regimented with how it should run with documentation, and this will really help. So being able to work with them, with that part of our team on more contract management will be a huge help too. So we're really, the technology's, it's changing all the time, and it's a matter of finding the right solution based on the entire landscape of what we're trying to do.
That's great, David, and thank you for outlining also what's coming up after billing subject matter. Then I can see contract management being the next priority.
Yeah.
And of course, there's this hot topic around generative AI, and some of these softwares are looking into ways of incorporating AI. I know contract management is doing it as well. Beyond this, is there any other type of technology, maybe beyond contract management, or do you think this will be like the suite and the technological stack that your team will need? Entity management, billing, matter management, and then contract management, maybe with some AI components in the future. Is there anything else that you can envision the real estate world needing in terms of technology support? Is there anything that exists or that don't exist that you can see as becoming a great support for your team in the future?
Yeah, I think like many people out there, I'm very curious about what role AI will play. We actually just got an update from our technology director last week. We use a Microsoft platform, and trying to streamline with Microsoft and their various offerings. So they're heavily invested in AI, and his feedback to our executive team was, it's coming, but it's not quite there yet. It's still very much in an infancy stage right now. As far as what it can generate, what it can do, the potential is basically unlimited. So from a legal perspective, I'm curious about what AI can do as far as generating contracts. I get a little nervous about that. I think that maybe it's just because it's so early and you hear the horror stories, and I know I don't go to court, it's not what I do, but I hear the stories of lawyers filing briefs into court with AI generated briefs that have just made up cases that don't exist. So it's not quite there. I think I can see it if you've got for example, if you're in a finance, banking sector. For us, it's leasing. We have a large leasing portfolio. So we have standard forms of leases that we start with, and then there's, certain step downs and different things that we can anticipate can happen. So I think there's some streamlining that can probably happen there. Definitely technology already exists to generate first drafts. So that's good. I'd be curious from an entity management thing, this is maybe more relevant to Athenian, is, there's lots of standard annual filings that are done. And it's interesting, you look through our minute books, it's the same. The only thing that changes every year is the date. Every year, same thing is the date. So there's things like that where there's probably some potential to even remove, like, more than just, create a task and have a human complete a task. That's probably something that this is just going to come up every year, and it just flows right. I can see that flowing right through, basically from an algorithm generates it, sends it off through DocuSign, it comes back and it just populates in there. So that'd be kind of cool. Where we've really seen a big one for our company is in the construction world. And that's one thing where, like, big data analysis can be really, really useful. So we're starting to use some technology that, if you think about a large building tower that's being built, say it's 20, 30, 40 stories high, and you think about all the different elements that go into building that, from an architect and all the different contractors and consultants you have to do, like somebody's, building the forms and pouring the concrete, but somebody's got to run the electrical, and somebody's going to run the heating, and somebody's got to run the plumbing pipes, and all these different things. So there's technology, AI that will take all of our contractors' drawings and work, put it into one, and generate that 3D image of the building and identify where there's conflict, where you've got, like, hey, you've got a heating pipe running this way, but you've got, an air duct going this way, and they're going to hit each other. We need to change that, which are things that sometimes you wouldn't catch until you're already building it. So
Yeah, that's
there's some
really
really,
cool.
yeah, and it's just a lot of just volume of data. Like, it's so data intense. So that's something. And what's really cool is that it shows up on your phone. So we can share that with all of our contractors, and they can see it in real time and get a visual image of it. So there's some really, really cool stuff out there. And it's just the start. So it's coming.
Yeah. Great. That's great, David. I can see how you're taking advantage of the technology more on the safe side, or else it becomes a liability, a risk, another risk to manage if we're not sure about what the technology is doing. So I like how you have a plan to roll out technology to make sure your team has the tools they need, and of course, embrace new technology as it comes, knowing that it's going to be safe, that it's really going to help the team to be more efficient.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
that takes us to the next topic. On driving growth through a strategic entity management. So I'll give it back to you, Tina.
Sure. And then just a general overview of just something we've been seeing in the industry. And then David, I'll turn it back to you again to kind of share what you've been seeing. But what we've noticed with some of our customers, and just real estate in general, is it continues to evolve, and organizations are facing increasingly complex challenges, and challenges that they haven't seen in the last 10 years in managing their legal entities more efficiently and effectively. There's a lot of regulatory compliance for risk mitigation, and strategic entity management is what we're seeing is really essential for real estate companies to thrive in today's competitive landscape. So it kind of poses the question, and I'll structure the question in this way of: how do you integrate new regulatory changes into your real estate entity management process to avoid any operational disruptions within your lean teams?
Yeah, so you're exactly right, Tina. The regulations are changing all the time, whether it's through corporate or tax, building codes. I don't think we've built two buildings in the same building code in the last 10 years. So there's definitely a lot of challenges, specifically for entity management. We had a very recent example, which is it's funny now, because I can look back and laugh, but it wasn't terribly funny at the time. So there was new tax legislation that came out in Canada. Started at the start of this year is when it came into effect, and what the federal government said is they were trying to identify areas of fraud within the real estate industry. And they said, well, we've got all these opaque structures that are in place, and we don't know who's behind it. So there's probably all kinds of money laundering happening, all through the real estate industry. So we're going to require any entity that is acting as a trustee or otherwise holding property on behalf of somebody else to register with the federal government and provide all the backup. So going back to our structure, and we have, for, as I said before, every property we have as 3 entities. One of those is a corporation that acts as a nominee. So its sole purpose to exist is to hold title to that property. There's some sort of logistical reasons why we do it here. But it literally, that's all it does. It sits on title at the land titles office as the legal owner. Beneficial ownership is up with a limited partnership. All of those entities were caught by this reporting legislation. So my poor VP tax I was talking about before, luckily he's now well-versed in Athenian, had to go through every single one of our nominee entities and validate what they were and provide all the documentation, all the backup for it. So I was over 100 entities that he had to do and go through all this. So it was great because I think he caught 4 that we needed to true up our agreement. So I was pretty happy with that as a hit rate, but he was able to get everything he needed just from getting into Athenian and going through and validating, which again, if we had to do that, like I don't even know what the bill would have been from external counsel. It would have been at least easily $10,000 for that bill. And the great irony of it all is that we got everything ready and he filed right on time, and then the government said, "Oh, just kidding, we don't need it." So it kind of was all for naught, but it was a good validation of the system. It was, again, back to my single source of truth. It was very validating for that. It was great that he had the confidence and the ability just to go in and he would just ask me questions when he needed them. He wasn't like, okay, I need you to, find all this information for me. He's able to get it all on his own. And sadly, it kind of went all for naught. But it was great. And we're seeing more of that too. Like there's just more and more regulation happening that impact our entities. There's new tax rules that came into effect that deal with foreign entities. So we really relied on our entity management system to identify what we owned, so we could make sure that we're onside those tax changes. So it's constant for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for sharing the Canadian perspective, because with industry news, and I know Rosie and I are trying to keep up to date with all the new regulations that are coming out in the States. We've been hearing a lot about the CTA, the Corporate Transparency Act. So we've been keeping a pulse with our customers to understand how they're addressing that, not only within the system, but the process of how they would even engage their legal counsel, and what teams would have to be involved in that whole audit process of getting the entity lists and all that information that's related to it. So I'm happy that you did share some of the regulations and some of the changes in the Canadian market, because I feel like we don't focus enough attention on that. And it's important to hear that even though it was an exercise, it's something that your organization's equipped to address at any given moment. And it really kind of speaks to the importance of not only technology, but having resourceful teams that can depend on validated information.
Yeah, I think the other thing I'd add to that, Tina, is where I see it a lot is in banking and all the finance work we do, and with the know your client rules that all lenders are under.
Yeah.
It's just they're getting KYC is an interesting area because it's always pretty intense and a deep dive, and it's not, in my experience, it isn't consistent. So dealing with one lender will maybe want something that's a little different than another lender will want something a little different from someone else. So that's another area that we've seen it where we have to make sure we've got the right information, because we're going through those KYC exercises more frequently and in more depth than previously. So
Yeah. And like, like West Group, many lenders are trying to address their own risk mitigation efforts as well. And that's why we're seeing a big push for KYC refreshes, for KYC packages to include information that maybe historically wasn't included. So definitely having access to that information is really critical for any organization, global operations, as well. But I was wondering if you could share some instances where, effective real estate entity management resulted in significant business productivity. I know you touched on some cost reduction with outside counsel in that instance, with the VP of tax, but has there been any other examples in the last 2 years that you've seen to kind of hold true to having more productivity within your teams, and just working on more valuable work?
Yeah, for sure. Again, it's that having that single source of truth information at our fingertips. One thing that we added on into how we're using Athenian is more property level information that we had before, but it was very scattered. Every property's got its own title report, it's got its own financing, it's got its own, there's really no two properties we have that are the same. So part of, once we had the entities loaded in, and then we started thinking, okay, what can we, it was actually, the hardest thing was avoiding the temptation to put too much in, because we were like, oh man, we can throw all kinds of stuff in here, this would be great. But we scaled back a bit. So, what do we make sure we really need? That will be lasting, because part of the challenge with putting too much information is if it becomes stale too quickly, then we've defeated our primary objective. So you're able to add way more property level information, which are things that we need, fairly regular. If something comes up, hey, I need a copy of title. Here it is. Like, it's all, we know it's in one spot, and it's all linked together, which is nice. So it helps, kind of complete the puzzle with that. And then we've been doing, most of our portfolio is very consistent with how we're structured, which is good. It's repeatable and reliable, and we know how we're doing it. We have done some different investment structures. We're going to do some more different investment structures, which it's great for me because we can just do it all. It's like, hey, we want to change this. We have different classes of this, or have different participants in here. We can manage all of that in-house. Whether we're working with different investment groups, different partners, all of that. So it's just, again, it's adding to our capability of what, for me as a service provider to the organization, adds to the capabilities of what I can provide and add some value to it. So yeah, it's definitely, it's otherwise, we would have done that with external counsel, but it's much better, in my experience, that since I'm there from start to finish, and part of the planning process and be able to take that all the way to execution, I think is just a great value add that we can have here.
Yeah, for sure. All right. With that, thank you, David. Let's bring it over to our last topic.
And our last topic, David, is on enhancing collaboration between legal and other business teams. And we know that a risk mitigation practice is to work collaboratively. So teams do not work on silos. Everybody's on the same page. Teams are not repeating work. So you mentioned a couple of great examples on how the team as West Group is using Athenian. For example, how the VP tax went to the nominee entities to validate information around KYC and UBO requirements. But also Tina mentioned that there are around 20 users from different teams using Athenian. My question is, do you see this collaboration expanding not only on the use of Athenian, but to other technologies? Are there other technologies that other teams use that legal team also has access to? Is this something that, or is this initiative from your team, or is it a company strategy to always work collaboratively, make sure everybody's on the same page, that the source of truth, regardless of the team, is available for everyone.
Yeah, collaboration is probably the biggest risk mitigator that we have here. And it encompasses everything, whether it's, our legal team, collaborating with and working with the groups that we work with. We see it a lot, particularly in our development side, because we have, when we're trying to plan how to build 2 million square feet over 20 years. You can just imagine the amount of collaboration that's required for that. There's a lot that goes into that, including legal and everything that goes in with the various legal agreements and approvals that we have to do. So yeah, collaboration is essential. And without it, it's risky. It's risky enough of business as it is. We don't need to make it more risky by having people in silos. So we very actively try to break down those silos. It's creating a culture of trust, and being able to work with each other, with a lot of psychological safety, and collaborate and challenge each other, and ultimately get the best product. So that's throughout our entire culture here. So bringing in what was previously, like I said, a bit of a black box on the legal side, to open that up, it just fit the culture here. And people, it's empowering for people. It adds, another layer of good communication and collaboration here. So it fits right in. And then, we see it growing with, because one of the fun things about being the in-house with the legal department is that we see the entire organization. Like, we literally work with everybody. And we're one of the few groups here that actually does that. So it gives us a really good perspective on what's going on in the organization. And we're there to help, right? We're there, I always say we're not the Department of No, like, we're part of the team, we're part of the collaboration. And we're there to, come up with answers and get results. So being able to, from my perspective, the more that we can bring in things, even, if you think about it, like, the entity management's a pretty narrow area for what we need. And quite frankly, there's only probably those 20 people are probably the people in the organization that really would need access to it and want it. But being able to even offer that just helps break down those silos. That makes legal look less like, we sort of operate in the shadows and nobody ever wants to talk to the legal group. We want to be involved right from the start, right? Like, that's how we want to do it. And the more we can show, like, we'll be rolling out more, kind of do-it-yourself contracts, where it's appropriate. We get standard form contracts where we can, again, empower people that are dealing with those contracts. Here's this form, use this form. We don't really do that right now. So this is, again, we're in an infancy stage in a lot of these things. But the more we can collaborate and share and empower people, it just makes it a better workplace.
Yeah, and that's great. I think you're on the right track to build that trust, to be more transparent, so people can trust the data also that they're working off. And yeah, that's what makes a difference. And so yeah, those are all our topics for today. So Tina, I'll give it back to you to wrap it up.
Yeah. Thank you, David, and Rosie as well, for all your insightful contributions to today's webinar. David, your expertise has truly enhanced our understanding of the critical collaboration between teams, bringing on new technology, bringing on technology in the future, and just your unique culture at West Group Properties. So we're very happy to have had you on today's webinar, and thanks to Lixology as well. We're going to now get into the Q&A portion. In the meantime, share your questions in the control panel. Anything that we do not get to today, we will follow up over email. To stay up to date on more strategies and industry news from myself and Rosie, maybe David as well, feel free to follow us on LinkedIn and connect. All right, let's see if we have anything here in the chat. So I don't see any questions on my end. David, are there any final sentiments that you wanted to share with the group today?
No, just I appreciate the opportunity and to come and kind of share our story a little bit. It's still very much being written, which is the fun part. And yeah, it's been a great partnership so far with Athenian. I'm really happy and continue to grow it as we go forward.
Great. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you all for attending today. We'll give you 4 minutes back.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Take care.